Mm, ah,
Welcome. Come on in. Come on in, folks. Come on in. Hey, Nick, how are you?
Doing pretty good. It's great to see you.
Good to see you. We'll just let folks come on in, give it another minute. All righty here. I think we're going to go ahead and get going. And I will just say, welcome, welcome, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Um, to talk about our tier two rollout, which is going to be about short term, last mile, and non deployment. So, thank you for joining, everybody. Appreciate it. Um, if you want to go to the next slide. So, here's kind of what we got laid out for you today. It's going to be a pretty, I would say, probably going to take up the full hour to talk about all of this stuff. It's we got a lot to cover, folks. But before we get started, I just want to mention that if you were involved with the middle mile, today is the last day. The window closes at 11:59. We might as well say midnight, um, and um, and then we'll start looking at our middle mile applications and see what we got going on there. But for today, it's all about tier two and what we're rolling out in the second half of our program here. So what do we got? Our introduction. We talk about the timeline, your resources, last mile, short-term construction, and non-deployment. And we'll kind of go through the application submission process again and talk about reminders, office hours, and so on. Questions. Next slide, please. So, as you can see, just a quick introduction. I don't really need to go that much in depth about it, but you know, the overview. This builds upon our high cost program, which I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with. That ended last year or 2 years ago in September, and here we are 2 years later to talk about the new stuff. So I'll just go on to the next slide. So we got our timeline here, and this is really pretty condensed. I mean, it's just kind of giving you a glimpse of what this looks like. So the this tier two part of this program is going to be open after our webinar here, starting today, and that window for those applications will close August 13th, and then we will make sure I'm following along correctly here. Publish the intent to award list, the challenge process, publish challenge results, announce final awards, and then we plan to execute those agreements hopefully sometime in December if everything goes well. So I think it will. But this is way condensed. There's a lot of things that happen in between these states, but just kind of giving you an overview of what that looks like. Let's see. Next slide, please. So, what we try to do with everything, we try to provide you with lots of resources, and we have that. If you go to our at FAD's local website, you'll see these resources. But I wanted to let you know that we will not have our user guide up just yet. We plan on getting that out by the end of the week or early next week. And I think that user guide is going to be very helpful for you. But we do have already addendums for each of these tiers for last mile, short term, and non deployment. So those addendi are up and ready for you to review. And I think those are going to be quite helpful for you. So, Next slide, please. I'm trying to navigate this thing on my end here, and it's driving me absolutely bonkers. All right. Last mile projects. Next slide, please. So this just gives you an idea of we'll start with last mile. And these are just kind of the strategic priorities that we've laid out for this particular tier here. And I'm not going to go through every detail because I think we're going to send the slides out um, for each of these priorities. So you'll have it for yourself, and I'm sure that all of you can read just fine. So next slide, please. So as you know, each of our tiers have minimum requirements that come along with them, and this is just outlining, what those last mile minimum requirements are. There are 8 of them, and in the addendum, each of these go into more depth about each one of what each one of them entails. So no need to kind of linger on this, but if you're looking at this right now and you have a burning question about what you see on the slide in terms of minimum requirements, does anybody want to chime in right here on this? Or otherwise, I'll just keep moving because I think it's pretty self explanatory that we have minimum requirements. Let's see here. Let's move on. So once you meet those minimum requirements, we then move to the next phase, which is our award criteria, and that is gauged by it's a points-based metrics, and so we evaluate each of these applications with the point system. And in the award criteria for last mile, you can get up to 85 points. How about that? Give or take, just depending on where you are. For example, if you have a bigger match, proportion to add, then of course you get more points for doing so. The more information you can provide with your projects is going to help you earn more of those points. So I think this is also pretty self-explanatory. It goes into more detail if you go to the website and get the addendum and take a look at it. So next slide, please.
All right. This is where I get to take over.
Yeah, and for everybody, we do have the super team, the CBO super team on here, and Megan, take it away, please.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Gernert. I'm the manager of the broadband data team. So I'll talk a little bit about the eligible locations and mapping resources. So first off, eligible locations, we determine those based on currently available data, including FCC data and various sources of funding data so that we're not duplicating any funding from federal or state resources. And then we publish that list. This is the first cycle of this new program, but for every year, we'll publish a new list of eligible locations. You can access that data on the website. We have the eligible location list, which is a CSV that has the location ID and tells you whether it's eligible or unserved or underserved. And in order to use that information, you will need a Fabric data license from CostQuest, which I'll talk about in a second. We also have a mapping tool that you can use to explore those locations on the map in case you need that visual in order to hone in on your locations. And I'll show that in the next slide as well. So the CostQuest license, if any of you are familiar with other programs, you probably have CostQuest licenses from the various federal programs. This is a similar setup, but it is a separate license. It's a no-cost license. So you'll just need to fill out this request form and have the license that is specific to the advanced local program in Colorado. The licensing process should be pretty quick. I think they can turn it around in a day or two if everything is filled out correctly, and then you sign your license and they'll deliver the data within another day. And all of those instructions can be found on the website. I think it's called CostQuest licensing information or something of that nature. So this is the mapping tool. And this is just a screenshot of, when you first open it up. And I don't know if y'all can see my pointer, but up in the top right corner, there's a instructions button that will open a slide deck that gives you detailed instructions on how to use the tool. And basically you can select locations from the map, and then down at the bottom, there will be a list of what you have selected, and you can actually export that list and use it as the upload for your application, with a few things that you'll need to fill in manually, but the structure is there that you should just be able to upload it straight into the portal. And once you have a selection, these tiles on the left side will tell you how many locations you have selected. Okay, so adding locations to your application. We have a template available on the website. It's linked in a bunch of different places, so you should be able to find it from the portal, from the guidelines, from the website. So in order to prepare the CSV, you just use that template, fill in the location IDs that you plan to serve, and then populate your proposed service data into the template. So if you're planning to offer fiber service at a gig symmetrical, you would put in 50, which is the code for fiber, and then 1,000 and 1,000 because that has to be in megabytes per second, and not gig. So those instructions are on the website, so you should be able to fill that out. It's pretty simple. Once you have that CSV saved and you get to the project design page of the application, you'll see an upload files section where you just upload the CSV, then you'll click process, and it will tell you if you have any errors with any of the formatting, and I'll show you some of those potential responses on the next slide, but you can kind of go back and forth to resolve any of those errors. And then once you have a successful upload, it'll tell you how many active locations you have successfully uploaded. So you just want to make sure that that number matches what you have in your spreadsheet. Because if the location ID doesn't match, or maybe you put an extra number in there or an extra row, that won't show up as an active location. So this is what that upload interface looks like. On the left side, I have an error that shows I don't have the download speed populated in row 8. So I need to go back to my CSV and make sure to fill that in. So once I update the CSV, I can click clear, and then I upload and process again. And ideally, you get to this screenshot on the right that says processed successfully, and that's where it will tell you how many locations match our eligible location list. So if I had 16 rows in my spreadsheet and only 15 came up active, I would want to go investigate and make sure I have the right location IDs in there.
Hey, Megan, I don't know if you want to keep going, but I did see a question pop up in the chat. Do you want to take it now?
The question is, can an eligible entity apply for multiple projects under this program under different tracks? So, Stephen, I think that's a question for you.
Yeah, the answer is yes, but what you have to do is you whatever current project that you're working on, you have to click the save for later button before you can open up in a different tier and start that application.
All right.
So John, I hope that makes sense and answers your question.
All right, so that's it for the location upload piece, and I'll hand it back to Stephen.
All right. So before we move on, I want to see if there's any questions around what Megan just discussed, because that was a lot of information and hopefully it was comprehensive and you understand. So are there any questions related to uploads and things like that in terms of last mile? So folks, you got the super team here. I mean, all together at once. So bring those questions on if you got them. Okay, I'm going to move on and talk about short-term construction. Next slide, please. So this is the priorities, like the other last mile, what we just talked about. We also have some strategic priorities that we, expect or, help to give you some guidance. So, like I said, I'm not going to read through all of them because you'll get these slides. This recording will go out and so forth. So, but this kind of helps you know exactly what the priorities are for this particular tier. Next slide, please. Again, with this tier, same as the others, you're going to have a series of minimum requirements that you have to meet. For this particular tier, it's a little shorter because it's a different tier and it's a different project area. So you only have 6 minimum requires to meet, but kind of the same thing in terms of matching funds and the scoring matrix and so forth. All that is going to still apply to this tier as well. Basically, all the other tiers as well too. So, so you got your minimum requirements. You can also find all that in the addendum as well. Again, you got an award criteria that we plan to score these applications by, and it's a total of 60 points that are available. Some of it kind of overlaps with the minimum requirements as well too. So same thing. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is something that is definitely new, kind of in the dark here, and that is why we assembled the super team member add-ons. And I'm going to let Melanie and Katie talk about the non-deployment aspect of this program here. So take it away.
Thank
Melanie,
you, Stephen.
Before we hop, yeah, there's one comment in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you share what is envisioned by an internet exchange point?
Oh, I don't think that's a non-deployment. Non-deployment.
No, I think that's a you question, Stephen.
What was that question again? Because I'm sure I
Stephen,
can
there was a
answer it.
bullet
And is
point that
there?
talked about CNLs and internet exchange points. Could you share a little bit of what you guys see as an internet exchange point?
I don't know, Brian. Do you want to take that one on?
I got to go back and look at our FAQs and the addendum to see what we want. We're saying, so just bear with me, Corey. I'll get back to you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, Corey, I apologize for that, but any questions that we're not able to answer in this forum here, we definitely will follow up with answers for those, and we post those as well. So it's not just gonna fade away and your question doesn't get answered. So I'm sorry, it's something that we are not able to answer right now, but we're not going to leave you hanging on that.
Cool.
Before the ladies jump into non-deployment, any other questions? All right. Well, it's time to talk about non-deployment. So let's go for it.
Okay. I am taking a guess at who our audience is today. I see one digital access OG in the room and a lot of names I don't recognize as specifically digital equity fans. So we will probably go into a little more detail just so that people have a bit of an understanding of what we're looking for with these funds. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Melanie Coletti. I'm currently with Department of Labor and Employment, but helping with this non-deployment piece because I have been overseeing the state's digital access work for the past 4 years. So happy to be thought partners with you all and make sure that we are able to get this funding to the projects that you all want to create. And then I'll let Katie introduce herself too before I go on.
Thanks, Melanie. I'm Katie Fox. I have also been working with Melanie on digital access, and I'm a little bit of our strategy and data nerd around. So I will be talking to you all a bit about how we define digital access, what it means in this context of non-deployment work.
Thanks, Katie. All right, I think we're ready to head on to the next slide. Okay, so this is a little bit of a different flavor than the other two Tier 2 projects. For non-deployment, we are particularly interested in projects that focus on digital access. So when you see non-deployment, what we mean is digital access. And for people who are like, digital access, what is that? Back in the old days when we had funding coming from the federal government, this was known as digital equity. And it was part of the Digital Equity Act, which is how the state got involved in this work. So what we're looking for here is more squishy stuff than construction. It is digital literacy training, including digital navigators, meaning people who are able to instruct others on digital skills. We are talking about distributing computers and devices for rural and or covered populations. Covered populations is another one of those phrases that came directly from the Digital Equity Act. So what we mean by that is basically underserved Coloradans. We also are looking for ways to reduce the burden of cost for people to have reliable high-speed internet access. For example, New Mexico just created a subsidy to replace the Affordable Connectivity Program. I don't know that we will have the amount of funds for someone to take that on, but just so you know what we mean when we're talking about affordability. And then any workforce development training that incorporates digital skills acquisition. So if you are curious about what any of these projects might look like, feel free to, when you get the slides, click on the Digital Inclusion Program manual link. This is a resource created by the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and they are amazing partners for all the states and even, local entities as far as how to create successful digital access programs. All right, I think we're ready for the next slide. So same as the other opportunities, we do have minimum requirements that are outlined in the addendum for non-deployment, and I have that pulled up just so you know sort of what we're talking about here. Excuse me, let's see. I lost it. Oh, okay. So need, you're going to have to create a statement of need, which is basically just articulating the community need for digital equity. So who in your community needs support? Why are you offering to do this work? We need a project proposal, which will be laid out. Oh, I'm reading the work criteria, sorry. But the need is the same. Eligible applicants, you'll see some links in the minimum requirements in the addendum, and those are different data points that we've used over the past 4 years. So if you want to like take a look at that, that'll be helpful for you. This cannot be for ongoing costs. That has to be capital and one-time costs. We'll need a timeline, and the matching funds are 15%. Those can be in kind. We realize that a lot of the applicants for this money won't have the ability to provide 15% in cash. So no worries on that. We do have the in-kind option, and then just a complete application. So, okay, now I'm ready for the next slide. And this is what I was starting to go through before. So same as the other, there are certain points for certain parts of the application, and you can see more details in the addendum. All right, next one. All right, this is a definition that Katie and I have worked with stakeholders on in the past. Our definition of digital access, not to be confused with digital accessibility, which is more the, can people use a screen reader, for example, on a website? This is digital access, and it means that Coloradans have the internet access, devices, skills, opportunities, and desire to participate digitally in ways that are meaningful to them. So keep that in mind as you're reviewing the addendum. The Colorado Digital Access team are 2 of us, Katie and myself. We are happy to, speak to you. We are happy to tell you about our work. And we will be providing an upcoming webinar specifically for this part of Tier 2. We haven't determined a date yet, but it will be soon, so you'll still have time to review that and meet the August deadline for application. Next slide, and I'm going to hand it over to Katie.
Thank you. So we want that overall definition Melanie shared in just one sentence. We want to give you a little bit more detail and visual context about what that means. So we do use desire to engage as where this starts, because we feel like if people don't want to engage digitally, there's not a lot else you can do. So once people have interest, building on that, we think really having meaningful opportunities. So, for example, if folks have kids in school, they really want to be able to engage in an online platform around what's happening with their kiddo's school experience. That's a great opportunity to kind of help folks feel motivated to learn some of these skills. Obviously, if they have a hard time accessing the internet, even if they have high desire, it's very hard to build those skills without the actual access, which we know is what many of these other parts of this funding work on. And then devices, right? If folks don't have a device, it's hard to keep it up to date. It's hard to keep the cybersecurity settings. That can also be a barrier. And skills and knowledge too, right? Like we want people to be interacting with digital environments with a lot of confidence, with a sense that they can learn what's going on, not feeling scared that they're about to constantly compromise their security, feeling like they kind of know where they want to go and how they can do it. We've gotten a lot of questions, understandably, about where AI goes in this model. So we want to call out explicitly AI is part of skills and knowledge from our perspective. Information literacy is something that the library world has been navigating since the 70s. And we really think that piece of understanding where information is coming from, why is it there, who made it, what's its purpose, that we think really aligns well with skills and knowledge that we use about all kinds of information that we find. And AI is another another system that's creating information. So this is sort of the whole picture of what non-deployment and digital access, how we define that. And it gives you a good idea of what kinds of activities, what kind of fit under these buckets. I'm ready for the next slide, please. And then we have this sort of like super level. So if you get through all those elements of digital access, then what do you have? Like, why does it matter? Why do you want to kind of almost collect all of those skills and pieces? Because we think once people have the internet access, the devices, the skills, opportunities, and desire, then you get this whole new opportunity really for people to continue to learn and adapt, right? Digital environments keep changing. They're not staying the same. And so we want people to be resilient and feel confident that they can keep learning, they can keep growing. And it's not like, I learned this once and if they change it, I'll be lost, right? We want to cultivate that resilience and that adaptability. And we're also seeing more and more that people want to manage their digital experience intentionally. They want to make choices. They don't want to accept every kind of digital experience, some of which are very unpleasant, right? They want to choose which ones are meaningful and helpful to them. So that's sort of the next tier up of if we get all the other ones, then we're looking at resilience. And that's a whole new world, basically. Sorry to quote Disney movies, but I don't have a better word for it. So hopefully that gives you a picture of what we mean when we're talking about digital access in this context of non-deployment work. And I think that's my last slide, so I'll send it back to Stephen.
Had myself on mute there. Thank you, Melanie and Katie. That was great. And I'm glad that you guys took the time to go a little bit more in depth about what you mean in terms of a lot of these things, because non-deployment is such a new field or area for the CBO. So I could have never spoke about it to the degree that you guys did. So I really appreciate that. And before we talk about the application, submitting an application, I wanted to see if we had any questions around non-deployment and digital access, because I know that was a lot of information that just came out to you guys.
I don't know if folks have other questions, but I see a question in the chat about when the slides will be posted on the website or if they'll be mailed out.
Chris, I know that speaks. Oh, go ahead, Brad.
Sorry. Typically, we'll get these on the website, unless Kristen has additional context, but we'll probably post the slides up on our website.
And before I move on, I just want to, there was a question that came in. I'm just going to backtrack for a second here. There was a question that came in from Brett, and Brian, you answered it in the chat, but I think I'm just going to read it out loud just so that everybody can hear it. Are regional broadband plans posted in common location for review to determine eligibility for CNLs and IXPs? So was that the question from Brian? And I think you answered that question for him in the chat. I don't know if you want to read your answer to Brent.
Yeah. So I thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I have to go back. Go ahead.
So you basically told him that the regional plans are posted on the local websites. So if you have trouble locating them, just reach out to reach out to us at our inbox, which is advance_CBO@state.co.us, and we can assist you in locating the plans. But it sounds to me like it's posted on local websites if you're looking for that information. And I think also it's important to note, I'm just backtracking a little bit here, giving a little bit of information. This program, the majority of the funding applies to middle mile. So it was 60% of our funding going towards middle mile, and the other 40% for last mile, short term, and non-deployment. So that's kind of how it's split. So what that looks like is probably approximately 20 to $25 million towards middle mile, and 14 million or so going towards the non-deployment type of stuff. So just in case that wasn't mentioned, I don't think it's mentioned in any of these slides. So just wanted to share that. So let's go to the next slide for some. Oh,
Stephen,
question?
sorry, we have a
Yeah.
few more questions that just
Okay.
came in. Oh, Brian got the one. So what is the total dollar value for tier 2? It's 14 million for anybody who isn't on chat. And then are the applications, is the application submitted the same for all 3 of the programs?
I'm going to say yes, but I think they would ask for a little bit more clarity on what do you mean? Are they all submitted the same?
I can add context to that. So essentially these are very the digital access is different than the short-term construction. So is the application system set up the same for all of them, or you'll choose which one you're applying under, and then it'll have different prompts, or how does that? Or is
Yeah,
it like
you just nailed it, and we're going to go through that process right now. So I think if you still have a question that remains after this little part of the presentation, we can talk about it some more. But I think this will help answer your question.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. So next slide. So one of the things that we're asking as you go through the application process is that you kind of try to gather as much information as you can before you start that process. So some of the things we're going to ask for is financial statements. That's audited financial statements. And if you don't have that right now, you can use unaudited financial statements, a cash flow sheet or a P&L or something like that in lieu of that audited financials until you get the audited financials. So eventually we still want to see what that looks like, but you can upload something to help you keep moving through the application process. You're going to need a certificate of registration. Certificate of good standing is what I'm talking about here. So hopefully you have access to get that and you know where to go to find it, but it's something that you're definitely going to need. So we ask that you to review all the documentation requirements and begin to prepare, an index or a structured application, but that's definitely going to help you. Next slide, please. So all these files are to be uploaded as part of the application process, outlining your experience, location, project area list. Some of this is just relevant to the specific tier that you're looking to apply for. So you're going to need project financial data, capital cost, operating cost, details on funding sources, matching capital investments, and this is all captured in a workbook that we have. So when you get to that portion of the application, you'll see that there's a link to click on that. It'll take you to the workbook, and you can sort it out through the workbook process. And if you have any questions, just let us know. We're happy to help. One big important thing is that when you're uploading files, to use the appropriate name convention so that when we're reviewing, we know what goes to what, because obviously the system doesn't read it and tell us this is this. So we need you to label it properly so that we know. Next slide. Well, let me just pause there to see if anybody has any questions. About kind of financials. I mean, the point I'm trying to make there is just to gather as much information that you can get before you start the process in your application. So this is just kind of what I spoke on briefly with the workbook and kind of what it entails. Milestones or timelines, capital costs, operating costs, project cash flow, summary output. All that information will be captured in the workbook. So just kind of giving you a head start through this presentation of some of the things that you're gonna need, and hopefully can find that documentation before you begin. Oh, let's see. Next slide, please. So the portal location is available on the Advanced Local website. You'll be notified that the portal is opening, which is going to open after this presentation. You can go in there, take a look, go to the website. And I think this slide is just kind of showing what that home page looks like. And I can barely read that myself to what it's pointing to. So I'm just going to keep it moving.
Stephen, that's so if you don't have an account created yet, you would need to click not a member in order to create a new account before you can get going. And if you have an account under, if you applied for the middle mile, that would be you already have an account, so you can just sign in with that username and password.
Thank you for that clarification, Megan, because I was just going to ask you about that. If they've already done something with the middle mile process, they're pretty much kind of in there. So thank you. So again, this is what the registration looks like. Clicking on the link will take you to this screen that you're seeing right there. Registration is Megan just talked about. Click on not member. Little did I know that all the information was on the next slide. So next slide. Wow, there you go. Next slide, please. So clicking on the link will take you to this screen where you do your registration, and then it asks for your company information is what you'll see after that. Name and company information. Next slide, please. So once you've gone through all, we're gonna dive a little bit more into this, but once you've gone through all the steps for an application, you'll see the portal thing that the steps say success. Click on finish, check and then you'll check your email inbox. Clicks on the events local page, link to begin your application, enter a new password, and then from there it's all set up, and then you can get going. I'm going to pause right there and see if anybody has any questions. Okay, keep it moving here. Next slide, please. So once you've got your account all set up, this is what you'll see. And if you can see underline there, it says applying for funding. You click on that. Next slide, please. And it'll take you here. And I think this is what we were talking about earlier with the question about the different tiers and can you do multiple applications and stuff. But here's all the selections. You click on the box that you want, the project that you want to start or the tier you want to start. Just check it, then click next. Next slide, please. And this is all the portal steps that you'll see. There's a legend right up to the right-hand side that you can see all the things that you're going to have to do or all the pages that it's going to take you through. So the legend represents each of the steps. It's important that you consult both the program guidelines, the appropriate addendum, and the user manual, which I talked about earlier. That'll be coming soon, the user manual. But I think some of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory as you navigate each page. Next slide, please. So I think, and obviously the each tier is different, and so the questions that are asked are going to be very different. But I think it's going to make sense to you once you're in the application process, especially if you've got all that information collected in front of you and have it ready to upload. So here's just a few reminders. Definitely go to the website for the resources. Check out the guidelines. The user guides and the addenda are going to be super important to have in front of you. But as always, you can email us through our inbox, and we're happy to answer the questions that way too. Very important to read the minimum requirements and the award criteria and the scoring. So make sure you pretty much understand that. I mentioned before, using the correct naming conventions. We'll see what comes in. We haven't started reviewing applications yet, even for our middle mile. That'll start tomorrow and the following day, and so on. So we'll see. And then complete the workbook. It's something that you can get from the website, and you can start that process and work through that before you start the application. So I think that's going to be very important. Complete the workbook. In that workbook, do not add any columns or row, because if you do, it'll probably mess up the formulas and the calculations and things, and we'll fix them. But if you need more rows and columns and things, just let us know. We'll adjust the worksheet for you, the workbook for you. So that's not a problem there. And again, upload the correct file format. Next slide, please. As always, we offer office hours. So I know this was a lot of information to absorb. I kind of went through my part of it very quick because I wanted the ladies to have plenty of time to talk about non-deployment, because it's so new, it's so broad, that we really don't even know what it's going to look like in terms of applications coming in. But I thought it was important that they give a more robust presentation from their end. So, but we got the office hours July 9th, 23rd, and August 6th. And we ask that you register in advance. So look at that. Got some time to spare for questions. Next slide, questions. Okay, we got the super team. Oh, Eric, you got your hand up.
I do.
What you got?
So I may have missed it, but did you go over the short-term construction? I noticed that we went over last mile and non-deployment, but I didn't seem like we went over the short-term construction.
We went over it so fast, Eric, that you probably blinked your eye and it was done. But basically, it's kind of going to be kind of similar to the last mile type of presentation we did. And it comes with, the same thing with the, meeting the minimum requirement eligibility. And then we have a scoring matrix or criteria, award criteria that we use to make our determine the applications from there. So it was pretty simple.
Okay.
I mean,
I guess my
did you
question
have
on
something more?
yeah,
Did
my
you have
question
something more
on it
specific?
was what differentiates the short-term construction from some of the same eligible items that were part of the middle mile program. In particular, it mentioned CNL or equipment huts as being one of the primary uses of that. But that was also something that could be included in the middle mile applications. Is this just more of a subcategory of that?
You can
What?
look.
Go ahead.
You can look at it that way, but I think you're going to see some overlap with a few of these programs. But Brian, I don't know. Do you want to specifically talk more about short-term construction? But one of the things we did mention too it was there's I would look at the strategic priorities. They're in the addendum too for each of these projects, what the strategic priorities are for each of these tiers. So I think that's going to kind of help you determine what it is specifically that we're looking for. So I would kind of refer to that.
Well, yeah, in those strategic priorities in particular, which I assume is just basically the bullet points in the overview, that kind of lays out what its primary purpose is. The beyond the construction component, there was one that's not, as far as I can tell, very well defined within the document, which is the improve the security of networks, including the costs associated with rip and replace programs. So that almost sounds maybe less about construction than it does the necessary electronics to run a network that might need to upgrade it. But I could be wrong about that. But if I go further down into the eligible applications of that, it doesn't really elaborate too much on the rip and replace comment of whatever that's supposed to be, equipment or physical fiber. I'm not sure what it's referring to. And so yeah, getting some clarity on that might really help in the FAQs in the future, if that's not known at the moment, what's that referring to?
Yeah, definitely. We could definitely circle back on that question. So, like, we're not going to leave you hanging on that. So, we'll try to pinpoint exactly what you're asking as we go back and review this and come up with an answer for you. But I think there's definitely some overlap in some of these tiers here. So, but we'll clarify, get an answer for you, and get that posted on the frequently asked questions on the website there. So, good
Yeah,
question.
Eric,
Oh,
just
go
to
ahead, Brian.
give some context, so short-term construction is about making upgrades or making adjustments to make connect areas that are, otherwise sometimes difficult to connect. And if there's upgrades of systems and security, that's something we could consider as well. But I think this is a really good point to make that we probably should give more context on that. So I think we're meeting on next Wednesday to discuss FAQs specifically related to all of our programs. So we'll add this comment, and then as soon as we get an answer, we'll let you know.
Yeah, because Eric, it sounds like you're not it's not providing enough clarity for you. You need more clarity.
It would be hard to put an application together, including that potential, without knowing what the actual intent was.
Makes complete sense. Okay, so we'll see what we can do about that and clear it up for you, Eric. Sound good?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see, getting kind of close to the end here, but do we have some more questions coming in? What? Okay. Any hands up that I'm not seeing? Anybody want to come off mute and ask your question?
Well, Stephen, hey, it's Corey Brindle again, Region 10. I guess that does
Yeah,
beg
hey,
the
Corey.
question. If we're seeking funding to upgrade antiquated equipment and expand capabilities, did you want to see that in a middle mile grant or in a new submittal through this program?
I think
With
that's
that,
kind of your oh, Brian, is that you speaking?
no, it's
Nope,
me.
nope.
With that program closing today, it would be helpful to know if we should have submitted that with the middle mile program or if this should go towards a new application.
Well, I think if you put it, if it's something that you included in your middle mile, I think that's fine. I think you also have another opportunity to, submit that as a short-term construction project as well. So, like I was saying, there is some overlap, kind of between those two things. So, or a few of these programs. So, I think it's perfectly reasonable or okay to do that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Just want to make sure we
You
were presenting those needs to you appropriately.
No, I appreciate the question. Thank you. Anybody else? Am I missing anything in the chat? Let's see what's going on here.
I think we're up to date. Does anyone feel like they've had a question that was missed? Please speak up or put it back in the chat. So I'm trying to go through them as we go forward.
I don't see anything new. So it sounds like we're wrapping up here. So as we wrap up here, just a reminder to definitely go to the website, look at the addenda there, and I think that's going to be a big help for you in terms of navigating. If you have any questions about the portal, please send them through the Advanced Local website inbox, and I'll get to them. Or, you can reach out to me directly if you want. I don't have a problem with that. Something just popped up in the chat here. Is there funding range for non-deployment projects?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a case of submit what you need and we'll review and assess. Obviously, we want all submissions to be within reason, and we'll do our best to assess every application that comes in and make sure there's an equitable distribution of funds. So
Thank you for that question, Megan. Any others? We had about 4 minutes. You're welcome. Nick, did you have any questions you wanted to ask? Because I know I had a site visit with you that went excellent, wonderful, very proud of you. And I kind of mentioned short term, and do you have anything you want to ask, or while you got the team together?
I really appreciate that. And this is super informative. I think we've got a pretty good idea as to what we potentially can leverage this program for. So we're going to review materials and go from there. So thank you again.
Awesome. Mm-hmm.
I did want to point out we are doing office hours. I think it's already been mentioned, but if there are, folks can attend those, you're welcome to come in with any questions you have, and we'll do our best to answer them then, or if not, get back to you ASAP and post them to the FAQ.
You are welcome. So I think we will wrap up there. I want to thank you all for attending. And the one thing I did not do at the beginning of this is tell you who I am. You see my name up there, but I'm Stephen Gould, and I'm the Senior Program Specialist here at the CBO. So I am at your beck and call, people. So with that, I think we'll leave it there, and tell everybody to have a wonderful day and look forward to getting those applications and seeing what we're working with. So appreciate you all.